All right, I guess I'll this off. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's event. UCB presents a conversation on disability in comedy. I'm Lacey Rose, and I'm going to be moderating tonight. The idea to host this panel came from Amy Poehler and Santina Muha. And in a minute, I'm going to welcome them to talk about why we're here. Santina, for those of you who don't know, is a comedian, an actress, and a regular performer at UCB here in LA. And if you've not caught her there, you may be one of the 10 million people who've watched her Ask a Woman in a Wheelchair series on BuzzFeed. And if you haven't, may I recommend you do. And Amy Poehler needs, well, absolutely no introduction. Take it away, ladies.
Thanks, Lacey. Hi, everybody. We were gonna just talk a little bit about why we decided to get together to do this, and we're so grateful for everybody who is joining us tonight and for the panel. And I'll let Santina do most of the talking, and this panel do most of the talking tonight, of course. But I just wanted to set up tonight by saying that I've had the pleasure of knowing Santina and getting to work with her quite a few times, and we started talking about how we could take advantage of this time, this very strange time that we're in, to talk about ways to expand people's views, their broad ways of thinking, but also just to talk about the very specific way in which disability and comedy intersect, and the comedy part was especially important to us.
That's right. Because it's a lot of drama when you see people with disabilities on TV. They end up killing themselves at the end and winning an Oscar. Blah, blah, blah. And you know, as everybody in this room knows, a lot of comedy is to be mined from having a disability, but it just nobody wants to touch it. You know, if all of us were having brunch right now, we would be hysterically laughing about all the dumb things people have been saying to us, and probably saying to us right there at the brunch. You know, we'd be getting material right there. So it's important for me because comedy is my favorite background and my favorite genre, and I don't want to be pushed out of that genre because I'm too sad to look at because I'm in a wheelchair, according to, you know, you who's sadder than me that I'm in a wheelchair. Come on. You know?
Perfectly said. And perfectly said. And before we introduce the panel, of which we have an incredible group that Lacey will talk about, I just wanted Santina. Oh yeah, CJ.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry, but there are a lot of deaf people that want to watch and cannot see the interpreters. Can someone pin the interpreter so that the interpreter can be seen? Oops, sorry.
This is great. How do we do that?
I'm not sure.
I think the viewer has to pin the interpreter. So if they're viewing, they need to pin that box, and they can do that by going to the upper right hand corner, clicking the 3 dots in the blue square, and pin video on Gary.
And Jordan already pinned me, so I should be seen now.
Also, you could put it on gallery view, right? So you could see everyone, is that?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is great because this is exactly what we're talking about today, which is basically continuing to ask for what you want, be open to adjusting.
They said thank you. All set. Thank you.
Great. And figuring out how to work together to make everybody feel included. So thank you, CJ, for asking for what you want. Yeah. So Santina, would you just read? Santina has a book that she's working on, and I don't know the title of it yet. Do you have,
Big Little
title
Lies
you're working on? Great. And I think it's going to be a big hit. And so we just thought we could kick things off tonally to have Santina read a little something.
Yes.
From
Now the book doesn't have a title yet, but this is an excerpt from my Coming Out as a Person with a Disability chapter. As a child, I didn't realize having a disability made me so different. I was almost 6 when I had my accident. The transition from crawling to walking didn't seem like a bad thing, so why should the transition from walking to wheeling be bad? I still studied cursive and multiplication in school like all the other kids. I still played Mother May I and braided plastic bracelets at recess like all the other little girls. I still ate shake and bake and Ortega tacos for dinner like all the other suburban families. Unless my nonna was cooking, then I ate things like stuffed artichokes and manicotti because, like being disabled, being Italian is one of the other words that will describe me forever.
Mhm.
As far as I could tell, the only difference between myself and the other kids at school was that I did all of this sitting down. But I was fine with it. And aside from the occasional curious questions, they were fine with it too. You know, they'd ask, do you sleep in your wheelchair? No, I get out of my wheelchair and sleep in my bed. Oh, okay, cool. Want to be my partner in art class today? Yep. I mean, if only it remained that simple, but our society has been acting like the default human is straight, white, and able-bodied for so long that as we grow up, we're taught consciously and subconsciously anything else is other, right? Now, I started seeing movies and very special episodes of TV shows where people in wheelchairs were portrayed as sob stories. On Saved by the Bell, Zach Morris went on a date with a girl in a wheelchair, and it's all he can talk about the whole episode, literally shouting at people, my date is in a wheelchair. On Beverly Hills 90210, the Walsh's cousin in a wheelchair comes to town, and I had to watch a dramatic scene that explores whether or not Kelly Taylor would date him, even though he's in a wheelchair. And on Doogie Howser, MD, Doogie met a girl in a pool and asked her out, only to discover on their first date that she's in a wheelchair. And he can't believe she's dancing like a regular girl. Hey, look, Zach Morris and Kelly Taylor weren't exactly the brightest blonde bombshells on my TV set, but Doogie was an effing doctor. You would think he would have had a better reaction to a person in a wheelchair, but no. I mean, and if I was watching these shows, then my peers were too. And little by little, I was being convinced by others that despite the fact that I was happy, fun, and a normal girl, being in a wheelchair sucked.
Oh, awesome. Can't wait to read that book. Thanks, Santina.
Yeah.
Take it away, Lacey.
That's hard to follow. I'm excited for all the other chapters. Thank you for that intro. I am going to tell you a little bit about everyone who is here. As Amy mentioned, this is really sort of designed to cover all parts of the filmmaking process, and we have actors and comedians and producers and directors and a casting director here. So I'll go through the list. Anastasia Somoza is an advocate for the disabled. She started her work in 1993 when at the age of 9, she had the opportunity to ask President Clinton to help mainstream her twin sister Alba into the New York City public school system. Anastasia is now leading the inclusion revolution as a human rights defender, speaker, and consultant. And yes, you may have seen her on stage at the 2016 DNC convention. CJ Jones is with us. He is an award-winning actor, writer, director, producer, and comedian. He has been performing worldwide for the deaf and hearing audiences and recently had a featured role in Baby Driver, making him the first African-American deaf actor to appear in a blockbuster film. He is also the founder of Sign World Studios and Sign Light, a nonprofit organization with its mission to create a post-production training program for the deaf and hard of hearing. Ben Harris is with us tonight. He is an Emmy Award-winning casting director known for casting Bridesmaids, The Office, Veep, Lady Bird, The Good Place, Booksmart, 8th Grade, and What We Do in the Shadows, so basically all of your favorite shows. Shannon DeVito is an actress and comedian with us tonight. She's best known for her roles in Difficult People, Insatiable, and Delco Proper. This year, she was named a BAFTA Breakthrough and stars in the award-winning South by Southwest film Best Summer Ever. And then we have Danny Woodburn, who is an award-winning actor with over 30 film and 150 television credits. He is best known for his work on 2009's Watchmen and, of course, Seinfeld. He is a disability rights advocate who was one of an elite group of individuals who has contributed to the changing perceptions of people with disability through his very public efforts in the film and TV industries, working directly with studios and networks, the union, and government to alter the landscape of opportunity, authenticity in casting, and employment of performers with disabilities. He serves as the co-vice chair of SAG-AFTRA's PWD committee. And we have Gary Greco, who I think you met earlier, who will be our ASL interpreter for the evening. Thank you all for being part of this discussion and for the many of you who are listening in. I was hoping to start this by taking a sort of a quick temperature check of how do you guys feel Hollywood is doing with regard to both its portrayal of this community and also the employment opportunities within it? Getting better, getting worse? Where are we at?
Anybody
Go,
want
Danny.
to take?
Please.
I'll lead off because I'm a privileged white male. I would say that change has definitely manifested exponentially over the last 4 years. I've just seen just some of the efforts, and I think social media has given the disability community such a voice to address some of the issues that they see in film and television, to address the tropes, to address the ignoring of people with disability having opportunity to be cast for roles. So the community's been very outspoken. They've also even sort of helped certain features close early because of protests. So I would say a lot of that's gone on in the last 4 or 5 years. 10 years ago, I was on the SAG-AFTRA negotiating, well, just was SAG then, SAG negotiating committee, and we negotiated a AMPTP, that's management, as we'll call them, and the union task force to address the very issues of disability casting and disability opportunity in film and television. So that for me was a spark. I think I've been working at this for at least 10 or more years before that, but that was I think the first spark to sort of set the fire in motion, and then social media really compounding the efforts of the community at large to help make the change as well.
What about the rest of you?
I think, I've moved out to Los Angeles about 8 years ago. And in the beginning of my career out here, I would go in for a role and it would be, there would be a girl in a wheelchair who was 12 years old and a guy in a wheelchair who was like in his 50s and me. And I'm like, what is this role? What are we here for? So now I'm starting to go in where I'll see my peers who are other actresses not in wheelchairs, they're just other comedic actresses, and I'm up for that role. And sometimes I still go in for the wheelchair roles, and I still see the same old suspects there, and that's fine. But as long as, it feels to me like I'm getting seen more for roles that are not necessarily written for someone with a disability, which was a huge, huge goal of mine. But it wasn't easy. I don't think, I had to move out here and start making a name for myself. And I think that's part of the thing about social media too that's great, is we can all sort of create our own content and be seen without someone giving us that platform. We're kind of making our own platforms, and I think that's helping as well. So I think it's getting better, but there's still work to do.
What do you think, Shannon?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely getting better. I mean, I think that when you watch TV, you tend to see some not as familiar faces that you've always seen. Like, I mean, Run was just a huge success and was authentically cast, which was amazing. And I think you're starting to see people in new roles and stuff. I do think comedy tends to be the one place that we still have a lot of room to grow. I think drama has really been successful in authentically casting and breaking that door open a little bit easier. I don't know why that is, but yeah, I mean, definitely social media has been great, because I think that a lot of us have been able to create our own work to show that we can do it, and people then open their eyes and go, oh wait, this person's actually funny, so let's use them. So I do think, we've been able to kind of give ourselves that platform, which has then opened a little bit more, some more doors, which has been great.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think it has been? I mean, you say that there's more room for growth in comedy. What would that look like, and why do you think it has lagged?
Oh, you're asking me? Oh gosh. I don't know the answer. I think that people are afraid to make fun of disability, which I know that we're going to get into. So I think that it's like a touchy subject. Like, can we laugh at this? I don't know, but we can cry at it, so that's fun. So I think that's maybe part of it. room to grow is just there needs to be more people with disabilities in comedies. I think that there are a couple and they're fabulous and wonderful, but I think that there's always room to grow, and I think that that's the biggest avenue to grow in.
I would. Oh,
CJ had a comment. I'd like to add to that. Yes, it's been recognized that folks with disabilities in comedy, they're really starting to show a presence more and more these days. But I think for deaf and hard of hearing individuals, we're always seen as the victim. We're not being represented correctly. So that's kind of why writers, really need to work with another deaf and hard of hearing individual to be educated on the deaf culture, what's going to be said, what needs to be said, how we say it. So I think there's still things that we need to work on. Yes, it's been growing. Wow, I've seen, such improvement. 3 years ago when I was casted in the role of Baby Driver, that was the first time everyone was, looking at me saying, wow, this guy can act. And I'm like, hello? It has nothing to do with my ears. It's the talent. It's the talent and the skills. And everyone was saying, oh, you're so funny. You're so funny. And I'm like, deaf people can be funny. Hello? So, that's where, yes, the door is opening. And there's acknowledgement and recognition, but I think it's so important that deaf folks and hearing folks educate each other, develop comedy scripts together. And I think that's why, my company and studio is open to dialogue and presenting that story and sharing stories together about disabilities and deaf and hard of hearing and hearing folks coming together. So it's all blended and it's a powerful voice, all working together in tandem. So I'm loving it right now. I'm loving the way it's going.
I would say, I think one of the ways that social media has helped to improve that we haven't mentioned here yet is that it's increased the interaction between those of us who have disabilities and those of us who don't. It's a space where we can have conversations no matter where we are in the world. That we didn't have that same access to dialogue. So I think social media in particular is increasing the dialogue. And in terms of where we need to improve, I think we need to improve no matter what the genre. The way we need to improve is to make sure that people with disabilities are involved in every aspect of the process. So people with disabilities need to be in the writers' rooms. People with disabilities need to be in front of the camera, behind the camera, involved in every part of the creative process. So I think that's one of the areas in which improvements can be made.
It's a really important point. One of the things I wanted to touch on before we get too deep into this conversation is to just have a quick conversation about the language, because I think, there is certainly some sense in certain circles where people get sort of too sensitive and they don't want to offend, and it's thus easier to sort of step away and perhaps not cast someone because you don't want to have a conversation. So talk to me about the preferred language. Danny, maybe this is something you can take. Disabled is the word many of you have been using.
What? How dare you, young woman? I think the community at large, although I hear from I guess maybe older factions that might still prefer the differently abled, intonation, but disability and disabled, person first, identity first, whatever, those words, disability and disabled, we really want to eliminate the stigma around. And I think that's part of the issue at large, is the stigma of a disabled person and what that means, what the visceral response is from employers. And we want to be, if we're more present on film and television, as we are in society, then the stigma diminishes. But if we keep seeing people who are not disabled portraying roles of disability, it perpetuates the stigma that people with disabilities can't do these things. There was for example, a Sia, I think, recently cast a film using a non-autistic person to play a person with autism, and there was a lot of blowback from that, and there was a lot of discussion about how much studying she did, and I think the issue was that there wasn't enough engagement with the community at large, and as a result, there was some uproar about it, and the response that she gave was something like, I don't know word for word, but the gist was that this would be too hard for a person with autism to perform in this way, because it was a very intense scene and whatever it was. But the reality is that people on the spectrum vary in their experiences of being autistic. So it's this idea that disability is one thing, right? So that's what we have to get away from, the idea that if we say deaf and hard of hearing, when I think of CJ, people are deaf to different degrees. They're hard of hearing to different degrees. Their experiences are completely different. Working with a young dancer now who is profoundly deaf, as she would say, who is she does dance without music, but she also dances with music. She can use her aids to help her hear some of the music. At times it's effort for her, but she's working in a different way, and we just have to understand that there's no one definition of disability, and that's where I think employers get concerned that there's only sort of, oh, they're disabled, that means they can't. That's the premise, that disabled means can't, and that's what we have to move away from, so that we don't get blowback from. And then on the other end of that, I'm sorry if I'm hogging this time, but on the other end of that is when the Academy recently changed their requirements for films to be acknowledged by the Academy, so that they were more inclusive films. There was a big blowback there, and the thing is, they always say, well, isn't acting? It's just acting, right? It's just acting. But the reality is that people with disability do not have equal access to the job. So until we're all on the same playing field, it's not just acting, it's show business. There's two aspects to this. So there's the acting part and the business part. And if we're left out of the business part, we're not going to get to the acting part.
Right. There are far fewer roles for people with disabilities right now than there are actors, creatives with disabilities. And that's where the problem is, I think, part of the problem. I mean, I remember the first time.
I would say that the roles don't have to be characters with disability. Right.
Right.
It can be the amputee who's a pizza delivery guy.
Yeah.
The person who uses a wheelchair who is a secretary and sitting behind a desk, and
right.
never comes into play in the
neighbor, the friend, the ex-girlfriend, the whatever. I've been all of those things. So why can't I be one of those things on the TV screen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anastasia, you look like you're about to say something.
CJ, exactly. What do you see? What you see is what you get. So naturally, in everyday life, we're a part of the mainstream. We have conversations, or we have conversations with other people. But like for myself, my role is to inspire young children and have them look up and say, hey, wow, he can do that, and level the playing field. It's so important, to the point where social media does impact. It can make an impact, and it has. We become role models to young actors, to other individuals, and pass that along, and we work together in that vein. We create together in that vein. So when we watch TV and we see these individuals, the passion is there. It's the same. We become role models, and that's what I would like to show and display.
Ben, I want to bring you into this conversation because I'm curious what the conversations are, where these conversations start with regard to who to cast in what role. whether it's how often you find casting directors considering casting disabled actors in non-disabled roles, and at what level are those decisions being made?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for including me on this panel. I'm very honored and humbled, and I'm also here to learn and listen as well.
And you'll be casting all of these people in in your next project.
Exactly. But to get back to your question, I think it was Anastasia that brought it up, but I think there are, across all facets of, in front of the camera, behind the camera, at the studio level, at the writing level, at the casting director level, I think we all sort of have different responsibilities in terms of, as casting directors. And again, I'm not speaking for the casting community. I'm speaking for myself and our office with Allison Jones. But I think for us, if there's a role, like Santina was saying, it's the ex-girlfriend, it's a bank teller, it's a scientist, I have no issue. In fact, it's, I think Santina came in, before we got started, she came in for, what was that, with Lennon Parham and Jessica St. Clair, and I think it was Avenue 5.
Yeah, yep, that's right.
It was for an HBO show. And for us, we brought Santina in because she's funny, right? And she's good, and she's qualified as a person, first and foremost, right? And the disability in this case was not what defined her or limited her in this role in any way.
It was my acting ability.
That's right. And so,
It was your terrible attitude.
your awful attitude. But so I guess where I was trying to go with this is that I think on the casting level in general, I think our responsibility is to, if a role is written for an actor with a disability, then we should be casting actors with disabilities. If there are roles that are written that isn't specific to having a disability, we should of course still, like bringing in Santina, we should be of course considering people with, actors with disabilities. At the writing level, right, and creating level, I think that's where, I think we already sort of touched on this a little bit, but that's where the writers and creators need to be providing opportunities where, and being open to, and hey, we want to find, a disabled actor for this role, and or that they're actually writing and creating a role that does maybe encompass your experience, right? As a disabled actor. And this is a question I have. I know that of course we want to consider you for a role that isn't specified, right? Disabled. But I think it's also important, right, that the writers and creators do consider that and create roles in comedy that isn't the sad wah wah, right, that you were saying in your in the excerpt from your book, right? That isn't like, oh, it kills himself at the end, or right? It's so
But in a funny way.
but in a hilarious way, yeah. Yeah, so I think, I don't know if that really answered your question. But,
it very much did. Are these conversations changing? Have you seen in the course of your time in this business, have those conversations changed?
Yeah, yes, they have changed. I haven't been around too long, but no, they've definitely changed. I'd say even in the last 4 or 5 years, I think it's changed quite a bit. I think anytime a role has been written to have a disability, it's first and foremost, we always push that, well, you need to cast an actor, a disabled actor, right? And sometimes we don't always get our way, and I think ultimately we push for that, and it's important to us, and we aren't, the buck doesn't always stop with us. So
I'm just going to jump in if you don't mind.
Please.
please.
I think it's important that we, as a community, make sure that the decision makers are educated about the facts of the opportunities that are available to people with disability who want to get into this business. So those of us that have come up in this industry and have tried and tried, CJ has a long history as an actor, as a performer. And, his breakout role was, as he said, 3-4 years ago. And now, people know CJ Jones, right? So, but he didn't just start a few years ago. So it's about understanding that the opportunity needs to be given to people with disability, that the higher ups need to seek out those of us that have not had the same chance at an education. When we think of education, and as an actor, we think about treading the boards, working on stage. That's how I came up on the stage. And so in looking at, say, going to Second City in Hollywood, and you want to get into comedy, the Second City Theater in Hollywood is up a long flight of stairs with no other access. So if I showed up and I have a mobility impairment that doesn't allow me to get up the stairs the way others do, or even just to get up the stairs, already the door has been closed. So I can't go to Second City. And that might have been my dream my whole life, and go to Hollywood. I want to study at Second City, and now it's done. I can't do it just because of that barrier that is there. And so the higher ups need to understand that if the opportunity hasn't been given, we now must give the opportunity, must seek out actors, even if they don't have a lot of experience, even if they don't have a lot of training, even if they aren't that great. Give them the little co-star roles, the little 2-line roles, the little under 5s that give them a resume, that build their confidence, that create opportunity. Let them audition. I mean, as an actor in my 20s, I would meet these guys that are auditioning, 6-7 times a week, and I'd be lucky then to get like 6-7 times a month, right? So that was the difference between other actors, other guys like me in their 20s, but not exactly like me, getting the kinds of opportunities they were getting versus the kinds of opportunities I was getting. So it just, the higher ups need to take a responsibility here and pave a path for people with disabilities to get more opportunity, to get employed, to build a resume.
For the rest of you, do you have any advice on how best to do that for these folks?
Well, you can make your own movies, you can make your own web series now, you can create your own stuff and then build your own resume that way. I know Second City is a great example of something that's not accessible. That's probably one of the main reasons I chose UCB of all of the comedy schools when I moved to LA, was because of the accessibility. And it wasn't even that accessible when I got here. It was the most accessible, and now it's fully accessible, but I think that has something to do with me, which is great. But it's like, sometimes I'm sure those of us in this room probably get tired of, it's like I'm trying to study my craft as an actress. I don't want to be trailblazing all day long. It's like, I'd love to just show up somewhere and it's already accessible. That would be amazing. And I think sometimes accommodation becomes segregation, and networking is such a big part of this job. So when I book something and my dressing room is, off to the side, or I get my hair and makeup done in the laundry room of the house where everyone else is talking in the trailer and getting to know each other, that also takes away some of my opportunities. So then I think it just goes back to creating your own stuff, creating your own opportunities. And then when I'm able to, creating opportunities for other people with disabilities, like I think we all have to pull each other up. Because I think too, just to be completely honest, a few years ago, I was afraid of someone like Shannon DeVito. I'd be like, get out of my lane, because it was like me or her, and that was versus,
I'm still
and
terrified
now
of you.
well, but now I want, I think it's important for us to create opportunities for each other and not block each other out. But that took some therapy for me to even get to that point, if I'm being honest. So stop pitting us against each other.
I don't know if you're there yet, Santina.
I'm getting
I don't see it personally. I don't see it. I don't think you're there.
working on it.
One of
DJ,
the, oh, sorry,
DJ
please,
had a comment.
please.
Love the dialogue here and the positivity and the room for growth. I just wanted to share my issues as well for people to be involved in the writing aspect and writing of script. Right now, I'm in the process of building a pitch deck together, and I'm pitching to various folks, and I want the industry to know that I have comedy, I have materials in drama, and I've been building those, networking and educating those. They're out there. There's comedic actors, there's different talented actors, deaf, hard of hearing. There's a lot happening. So I really think that supporting and continuing the dialogue and the industry hearing the noise and getting that vibe of us getting together, such as this, more talking about this, more doing it, more representation. Action makes things happen. Talk is cheap. So putting it together, and it means a lot for all of us, putting it together and putting it into action. Now, what do? We talk about this, we develop collaborations, we work together. There's a lot of talent in the industry, and we pass this amongst each other in a collaborative effort. You wouldn't imagine the talented people that are out there. You can't possibly imagine they're out there. They're waiting to grow. They're bursting at the seams. So that's the awesome opportunity here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I talk faster than the interpreter has to keep up. There is a little lag here. So, bear with me here. The interpreter, sorry, time out.
I know you're at half speed right now, CJ. I know it.
I would add that a lot of people don't focus so much on this sometimes because we have come so far, which in some ways is obviously great, but a lot of it also goes back to going back to the basics and never forgetting about the basics. And when I say that, I mean there's still a lot of work, even though those of us with disabilities really can't stand this. The reality is there's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to shattering perception about, I think part of the controversy that happened with Sia was because there's this sense that it's so hard to make things accessible, and so much money and time has to go into training a disabled actor or to making a theater accessible, and the response is there's never enough money to install a ramp, and the reality is if we want to change it, we have to stop making those excuses. Even though I'm not an actor, I consulted with my best friend who's a theater producer here in New York because he wanted to put a theater production together for children so that children could see themselves on a stage, and he could not get the project funded. And all of that was about perception because everybody said nobody wants to come watch a show about a bunch of disabled kids. It's too sad. And so I think that comes down to perception. And if people have this sense that our lives are sad, that is too difficult to look at, that is too difficult to deal with, or too expensive to make accessible, because he could, like, even though I was a consultant on the show, I couldn't even access his stage because there was no physical accessibility. So theaters have to become accessible. We have to put, the industry as a whole has to put money into making places accessible so that when Santina goes for an audition, she can be in the same spaces that everybody else is. And people forget about the basics sometimes, so we always have to focus on, helping those of us that still don't understand to shift the perception. And once people realize that it's not all about sadness, death, dying, or feeling sorry for us, then money will start flowing in, and then projects will start being made.
Well, that's when you say to that person who objects that it's so sad, that you say, no, you misunderstood the premise. The whole show is all these kids talk about what a dick you are. So that, that might clear up the perception. The reality is too, I will add to this, Anastasia, is that Union has stats on this. They have stats on what the actual cost is. And 90% of shows that hire people with disabilities have no extra cost. Of that 10%, only 10% of that 10% costs more than $500
Of course.
to make any accommodation. And the reality is that it's a place of employment. By law, they are required to make it accessible. So
Of
that
course.
theater by law is required to make it accessible.
But I absolutely agree with you. But the problem is that's why I come back to perception and knowledge and understanding, because even though that's the reality, very, very, very few people understand that and know that. So it's about messaging and educating and helping the larger industry understand what we already know.
Or that's when you say to those possible producers, you say, look, our budget is only $100,000, but after hearing you object to this and not wanting to make this accessible, we're going to up our budget to $5 million, because after we sue you, we're going to get all that money to make a bigger show. We'll do it at another theater, of course, but you have an opportunity now to do it here.
I love it. One of the debates that's being had often in Hollywood these days is one of who can tell what story. And I think this goes back to a comment Shannon made earlier in this panel with regard to there's a far more dramas than there are comedies. But I am curious, do you think non-disabled people can and or should write disability humor, or does it have to be written by someone with a disability? Where do you fall on the scale here?
I definitely think it can, and I'll not bring this up just because Amy's on the panel, but I think Difficult People did it so brilliantly, and I think because Julie worked with me on what would work, she was able to write this character who was disabled, but not originally, but in the process of writing it, incorporated it into her character, and we utilized, we didn't make fun of the disability, we allowed the character to use her disability as humor. And I think that's where it can be very successful, because as long as you're not making fun of a person with a disability and you're using their disability to create something from a different perspective and a different POV, it's such a tool that people can use, as long as you're doing it in a way that is benefiting the character, not harming it.
CJ had a comment.
Please.
So I'm glad you brought up that question, because recently we've had some comedic shows, and the material's always been written by a hearing person, and it's a joke made by a hearing actor and a deaf person responding to that joke, and it's not really realistic. It'd be more of an impact if the writer or a deaf or hard of hearing person work together with the writer to educate the appropriate material for the script. That becomes much more funnier, because the writer doesn't know, hasn't experienced or hasn't been involved in the world of a deaf or hard of hearing individual to find out and how it works together to put together a beautiful comedic piece. So it's kind of artificial and fake and thrown together. So I think, having actors who have that funny comedic experience with disabilities working alongside writers, I guarantee you that person already has humor and skills and experiences involved that can be shared with the writer, so that the writers put together a beautiful piece and it works together in one scene. It's not just about being deaf or being blind or hard of hearing. but it's a joke in life. It's experience in life, and it's written so well. Making fun of a deaf individual or ranking on a person not being able to hear, that needs to be thrown out. That's so passe. And just working together with good, smart, comedic jokes and material, working in tandem with that individual writing would be awesome.
Yeah, I think CJ's spot on with that. It's all about engagement. Like, so you have a non-disabled writer writing a story, and then they write something about the person's disability, and then they hire an actor who doesn't have that disability, then all engagement has gone out the window. So since it's the holidays, I'll talk about a film I did, my first major film, Jingle All the Way. I was asked in a scene at some point when we attack Arnold Schwarzenegger to bite him on the ass. So the director comes up to me and he goes, "In this moment, Danny, you're going to run up and you're going to bite him on the ass." And I go, "What?" And I'm like,
I remember that saying, CJ.
So you've heard this story, CJ, I'm sure. But I like, immediately I turn to Jim Belushi, who's a co-star, and I say, "Jim, I don't feel comfortable with this. What do you think about that?" And Jim looks at me and goes, "Yeah, I'd bite him on the ass." So I turn to Arnold and I go, "Arnold, you know, it felt to me all wrong, you know, to have the little man made into sort of an animal character in that moment, because it happens a lot in my career." So I turn to Arnold and I go, "Arnold, what do you think? Do I do this?" And Arnold goes, "Yeah, Danny, come on, you're going to bite me on the ass. It'd be great. It'd be very, very funny." And I'm like, still, everything in me said, no. So this comes back to advocating for yourself and engaging with the writers and the producers and saying, "Look, I don't feel comfortable with this. This is sort of a trope about little people, men. It's very creepy, and I just don't feel comfortable doing it." So what we ended up, he said, "Well, come up with something." So I had to come up with something. So I said, "Get me a stun gun." Okay. Prop guy got me a stun gun, like in the same, hour. So they give me the stun gun. So in that beat where I'm supposed to be biting Arnold on the ass, the character pulls out the stun gun and zaps him. And that, for me, I zapped him on the ass, which was fine. But the whole animalizing of little people, men, was just not my thing. And fast forward, I get offered a role. I read this script. I'm supposed to fly to New York for this show. And in the script, there's a little tussle between me and one of the other dads. And again, biting him on the ass.
Whoa.
So I called my agent and I said, "Look, I'm not going to fly to New York and I'm not going to get into a debate about this. Tell them now and put in my contract, Danny will not be biting anyone on the ass." So it was in my contract.
I mean,
Yeah, it's about that authenticity. And also, just so people know out there who are watching, there are consultants. Like that's one of my jobs, is I'm a disability consultant. So if someone's writing a script and they don't have a person with a disability cast yet in mind, but they know they have this role, you can hire people just like all other diversity consultants. But the thing is, you have to pay them, okay? Because sometimes they think you're just going to give them to them.
You get paid?
Yes, honey. I'll share my tips with you.
Oh no.
I'm just gonna. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I do want to end on what I hope is a fun question. We obviously have a lot of executives and casting execs who are watching and listening to this. So I want to provide those who have answers to complete this sentence for me. I'd love to play what? What's the dream role? What would you love to be cast as? But people, go, please.
I'd love to play Marissa Tomei's part in the My Cousin Vinny reboots.
Ooh, Santina, you would be so good.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. I want to write that right now.
Anyone else have one? Is there a dream role that Hollywood has not yet seen you for, but you'd be great for? Yes, CJ.
I would love to be in the role with Bernie Mac. I would love to be a Bernie Mac character signing, doing my comedic thing. That is my goal. Doing my own show, just like Bernie Mac did, with family. And, Amy, you're more than welcome to be in my show as well. So
I forgot it would be my honor.
Fine. Come on in.
Thank you.
Oh,
If
Yeah.
nobody has, do you have one, Shannon? Please.
well, okay. I would like to play anything anyone wants to give me a role in. No. I would love to play like a sports executive. Um, I like a baseball owner or something like that.
Yeah.
I just think that like I love high status characters, and I think like an ensemble piece about a sports executive in a wheelchair would be really fun. It's like Marge Shot, but like not racist.
I just have to say, I love that you said you love high status characters, because so do I. And that already is bucking against the stereotype,
Listen, I
right?
told you I'm terrified of you. We've already established that.
It's so funny that people would look at us like we're low status, but look, we both I got that note and it used to be all the time. You playing too many high status, Santina. All right, what's up?
Oh, that's it.
Unless anyone has anything else to add, I think.
Superhero. I will say superhero.
Oh.
In a 5-picture deal.
Oh, I like it.
Okay.
That's a
Ambition.
perfect. Well, thank you all for being part of this conversation.
I just
know
wanted a
we're-
trainer to get me in shape on somebody else's dime.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being part of this conversation. I mean, I personally learned a lot, and I suspect many out there who are watching and listening did too. So thank you, and I hope this is a conversation that we can continue having. So thank you all.
Indeed.
And thank you, Santina and Amy.
Thank you,
for putting it
everybody.
together.
And Amy, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely our pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, everybody out there who listened. Thanks so much. There'll be more info to come, and this is the beginning of what we hope will be more conversations like this to keep the community growing, and to CJ's point, act, because words aren't for shit, right? So action's what we're talking about. So
Right.
thank you,
So
everybody.
much,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.